Facts Verse presents 7 decades after he disappeared in World War II, his wife discovers the truth. Before we get into this soap opera of a story, help us spread the word about Facts Verse by clicking the like button, and also be sure to subscribe, and if you're new here, click the notification bell. That way you won't miss our future videos. Peggy Seal had just graduated from high school when World War II began. Men were being called to serve in the military, and although she was a woman and wouldn't be called to the front lines to serve, she still wanted to help. She left her hometown of Vernon, Texas, and headed to Altus Air Force Base in Oklahoma. There, Peggy started working as an electrical mechanic. Peggy was the only woman with that job, which quickly caught the attention of many men on base. She was beautiful, and one of the generals on the base believed Peggy would be perfect for his son. The general's son was Billy Harris, and he was an aviation pilot stationed in San Antonio. The general tried to get Peggy to write to his son Billy, but she didn't like the idea of writing to a complete stranger. Instead, Billy wrote to Peggy, and when he sent his father a letter, he included one for Peggy as well. At first, she wasn't sure if she was going to answer the letter. However, she soon realized that they were destined to be together. It wasn't long before the two wrote back and forth frequently, and they started to fall for one another. Kind of like You Got Mail, the movie. Well, Peggy was worried about the distance, so she tried to remain friends with him and tried to discourage him from wanting a real relationship with her. In her letters, she told him that she loved opera and that she often listened to it on Saturday afternoons. She assumed that would be a turnoff, but he continued to write to her. She told him that she often memorized poetry, and he told her that he did the same. Well, as much as Peggy tried to dissuade Billy from falling in love with her, he still wanted to meet her. Finally, while on leave, Billy went to visit his father at Peggy's base, and they finally saw each other face to face. And for both of them, it was love at first sight. After Billy returned to his base, they continued writing, and soon they were engaged to be married. They had a very short engagement and got married in 1943. Sadly, though, it wasn't long after the marriage that Billy found out that he was heading to Florida and he would be going to Europe to fight the Nazis. Peggy didn't want to be separated from her husband, so she went to Florida to be with him. They had 2 weeks together before he was deployed to Europe. Before he left, the couple exchanged high school rings. They didn't have the money to buy wedding rings, so this was the best they could do. Since they were so madly in love, they didn't really care about the rings. They only cared about what the rings represented. Well, Peggy and Billy were only married for 6 weeks, and they were looking forward to a 2-week vacation that they would take before Billy deployed to Europe. Sadly, though, a German U-boat attacked a U.S. vessel off the coast of East Florida and killed everyone on board, and that caused the Army to ship Billy and his men out immediately. Before leaving, Billy was promoted to second lieutenant. Peggy had no idea at the time, but when Billy shipped out, it would be the last time she would see him. After Billy left, Peggy was sent to Texas, but was told not to tell anybody where her husband had been sent. She was told that there were spies all over the United States and people needed to keep quiet about the pilot's location. They couldn't risk the enemy knowing that more pilots were heading to Europe. While Billy was in the UK, he took part in 60 to 100 missions, which were enough to get him a ticket home. He couldn't wait to see his wife, and he raced to the boat that was to take him home. Sadly, though, there was only room for one soldier on the boat, and it had been given to a wounded soldier. Billy knew that he could be on the next boat, so he remained in high spirits. He wrote Peggy a letter to tell her about the delay, and she wasn't happy with it, but she was glad that he was safe. Billy didn't feel right, though, just sitting around waiting for a boat, so he got into his plane and went on another mission. Peggy waited to hear from her husband for months, and one day she got a letter from the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. The letter said that Billy had returned to the U.S. Well, Peggy was thrilled. She was sure that her husband would be home soon. But the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, with no sign of Billy. When she asked, she was told that he was being processed and it would just take time. Peggy and Billy's family didn't believe that story, though. They were sure something had happened. In 1944, Peggy got a letter saying that Billy was missing in action. The letter was dated July 7th, the same date as the letter she received from Billy. Later, she was told that her husband died in action, but she didn't believe that either. And over the years, she wrote letters to Washington, D.C. to find out the truth about what happened to her husband. Over the years, she gave up hope that her husband was alive, but she still wanted to know how he died and where it happened. She needed closure. In 2005, she wrote to a congressman who told her that her husband was missing in action. It had been decades, and she wasn't going to give up on her husband. But one day she got a strange call. Somebody had requested a copy of Billy's records. It was a woman in France. It turned out that Billy was killed in action, and the woman who checked his records was the mayor of the town where Billy Harris was considered a hero. 7 decades after his disappearance in World War II, his wife finally found out the truth. Subscribe for more.